The Wednesday, March 26th meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, the Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. Oh, look. Everybody, look, follow the chair's example and silence your cell phones. Gosh. Anyway, Supervisor DiMattei, could you lead us in the flag song? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, I'd like to thank Supervisor Jones for chairing in my absence last month. And Sylvia, can we have a roll call?
Broadway.
Here.
Brown. Cortez.
Here.
DiMattei.
Here.
Dowden Calvillo.
Present.
Howdeshelt.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Have a quorum.
All right, great. Sylvia, would you read the meeting procedures?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Agendas are available outside the board chambers on the back table or on the PCTPA website. All comments from the public should be directed to the board. All speakers must speak from the podium as this meeting is being recorded. For those who are joining us by Zoom webinar, you can signal you wish to speak by clicking the raise hand button on the Zoom window. If you are joining by phone, press *9 and staff will call out individuals who have indicated they wish to speak. If you would like to comment on an item that is not listed on the agenda, please do so under public comment listed as item F on the agenda. In addition, the Brown Act requires that the public have an opportunity to comment on all items on the agenda. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. The time will be monitored, and once the yellow light appears at the podium, or for those online participants, when you hear a beep, the speaker will have 1 minute to conclude their comments. Lastly, the board asks that you consider stating your name for the record this morning. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Sylvia. All right, next up is agenda review with our executive director, Matt Click.
Chair, no changes to the agenda.
All right, great. Next up is the AB 2449. Yeah, Matt, you again.
Yeah, no action required
Great.
for AB 2449.
Right. Next item is the approval of the minutes from the February 26, 2025. Do I need to open it for public comment? Any public comment on it?
Dowden Calvillo moves approval.
Of course.
Second.
Yes. Oh, wow. Wow. Jones, you got to get in there faster.
no
Okay. All right.
They didn't turn their lights on.
Oh, wow. All right. Roll call vote? No roll call? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Bruce abstains. He wasn't here. All right, next we'll have public comment on agenda items not on this agenda. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. All right. Now we'll move to the consent calendar for the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. These items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They'll be acted upon by the board with one action without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested citizen may request an item be removed from the consent calendar for discussion. On the consent calendar for the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency is approval of the Interstate 80 Aux Lane Project Construction Support Services Letter Task Agreement number 24-01, Amendment number 2, Budget Reallocation, $19,905.
Jones moves approval.
Jones approves.
Second.
Second by Cortez. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Abstentions? No. Next up is item H, the FY 2024-2025 overall work program and budget amendment number 2, and Jody Lacoste, our fiscal and administrative officer, will present.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the board. Today I'm going to present to you the Amendment 2 of the current year budget. Very few changes on this budget. There were some staffing adjustments of less than $3,000, and then there was some shifting of hours to work based on workload to different work elements within the OWP. And then lastly, LTF carryover of 551,000 was added into it as I did not have it available at the Amendment 1 when I brought that to you. I believe it's in September. Those books were not closed yet for the prior fiscal year. And this is just a look at how it compares Amendment 2 to Amendment 1. We have a balanced budget with an ending fund balance or surplus that meets our set requirements. And with that, that's the end of my presentation, and staff recommends approval.
Any questions from the board? All right, I'll open it for public comment. Seeing no public comment, I'll close it. I'll bring it back to the board for action.
I'll move approval, adoption of Resolution 25-11.
All right, approved by Dowden, Cavillo, and Brown, was that? Brown, okay.
Get in there, Benny.
All right, I think from henceforth, if the motion's over here, second will be over here. All those in favors?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? All right, great. Next up, we have an important discussion about our state
Smart
legislative.
man.
All right, obviously, I'm not setting a good example, and this is becoming very.
9:07, you're doing great.
No.
phenomenal.
So, next up, we have a very important discussion on our state legislative program, starting with our Executive Director, Matt Click.
Thank you, Chair. This is an action item. We are going to be asking the board to adopt our state legislative program for 2025 as it's reflected in the staff report inside of your packet. In truth, most of our sort of state level sort of legislative positions remain unchanged from last year, really the year before. You know, we continue to find ourselves in this unique position in Placer County where we are one of the, you know, fastest growing counties in the state of California, in a state that's losing population. And we're growing in a manner where, and if you look at the county's transportation report, where, you know, the vast majority of us are commuting and getting around, you know, by car, most of the time by ourselves, if not, you know, 19 to 20% of us working from home. So really the transportation issues that we have in our county and the solutions we're looking for are a little bit out of the norm for the rest of the state of California. So lots of times we're sort of not in alignment with the state's priorities. The state's trying to figure out, you know, when it thinks about places like Los Angeles and San Francisco, how it, you know, deals with that transit fiscal cliff and those sorts of things. So we're going to continue to prioritize highway expansion, roadway expansion, look for those opportunities, and working in a more and sort of just ever-increasing regulatory environment where, you know, what our priorities are for our transportation system aren't in perfect alignment with the state's. So we'll continue to aggressively, you know, lobby, you know, those positions. And with us in chambers today is Mark Watts, who's our state-level lobbyist, and Mark's going to come up and just talk for a few minutes about sort of what he's seen on the horizon. And really what we want to do is just open it up and get a dialogue and get the opportunity to answer your questions around the state and what we see into the future. So Mark, with that, I'll ask you to come up and address the board.
Do I need to push a button? I guess not.
No.
Thank you very much. Very pleased to be here today. I feel like I'm working with friends that I've known for a long time, so it's kind of interesting. It's the first time I've been before you where there are people on the dais that I've worked directly with, supervisor, council member. Before I jump into this, I thought for the rest of you, I'd just give you a 2-second elevator speech about my background. Notwithstanding the fact that I spent my first 8 years working in Caltrans, I later worked in the state legislature doing transportation budgets. I was the person who put together the subcommittee budget agenda and made recommendations on transportation, including DMV, CHP, and Caltrans. Later, I was appointed by Governor Wilson to be Undersecretary for Transportation, where I had policy guidance over Caltrans, DMV, and CHP. It was a great year, but it was interrupted by a friend of mine becoming the Speaker of the Assembly, and the council member from Auburn and myself both worked for him. I was his chief of staff for that one glorious year, and then we lost the House. So I've got a good background, and ever since then I've been a transportation lobbyist, and I focus on transportation, and I've really appreciated the time that I've had working on your behalf. I did the bill as Councilmember Bud, we would recall, that allowed the county to be divided, to have an opportunity to have a best attempt to get a sales tax going. So that's enough about me. I just wanted to give you some assurance that I know what I'm doing. So this year is an interesting year. We have 35 new legislators, and every day I see somebody and I go, get my book out. Is he a person? Is she a person that's been elected, or is that just staff? So it's kind of interesting. But there are going to be some very interesting issues surrounding transportation. But first of all, I just want to mention that when the governor released his budget in January, it was surprisingly balanced with a very minor surplus, which has since blown up. The fires, disastrous fires in LA, are going to be, the communities down there are going to be coming to Sacramento asking for money to help them get going again, as well as there's a lingering issue with Medi-Cal. You probably read about it. The governor's trying to borrow $3.4 billion from one of the special funds in order to get Medi-Cal through the year. So we'll see how that goes. On the transportation budget, in January, it was surprisingly unaffected by issues we've seen in the past. Previous budgets, we'd seen clawbacks of money being proposed, and we fought hard collectively. SACOG, big Southern California MPOs and transportation agencies around the state put together a very good coalition. We saved the money. This year, the governor did propose that the $2 billion he promised us last year for this year is in the budget. Now, I just mentioned that there's people needing to have access to fire relief and Medi-Cal, so I don't know how this is going to end up for transportation. Interestingly enough, the money that was provided, the $2 billion in this year's budget for transportation, was dedicated to transit. And as you may have read over the years, the last couple of years, there's been a big deficiency in transit funding across the state. In fact, there's a special task force that I'm on, the Transit Transformation Task Force, trying to come up with ways to improve the operations, improve the access for people, for the public, to get on the buses and have a quality ride. And also, they're looking for money. So I'm not sure how that's going to turn out. I would want to turn briefly to one of the big issues this year will be cap and trade. The current cap and trade program sunsets. The authorization to go to the marketplace to sell emission rights is capped at 2030. There are several programs that look at that from a long-term perspective, and we're able to draw money, commitments from future cap and trade auctions, and that stops in 2030. So we're going to see a slowdown, if no change is made, to the transit and intercity rail program, which has been very helpful to this county in particular. It's funded two funding slices for the third rail out of Roseville. So I'm not sure how this is going to turn out. It's just a bellwether note that it is an issue. There are discussions about extending it beyond 2030. But with 35 new legislators who don't understand cap and trade yet, it's going to be very difficult to get them to bite the bullet, I think, in my perspective, being around here for 30 years, to bite the bullet and actually vote to extend cap and trade, which is an indirect tax on the people. So I just want to mention that. We'll see how that turns out. One other issue that's really emerged, and it's hard to get your arms around it, this is the fact that the fuel efficiency we've talked about over the years having an effect on gas and fuel and diesel fuel sales and therefore taxes is actually coming to fruition. The amount of more efficient vehicles as part of the fleet is growing at a rapid pace, and that rapid pace is having a deleterious effect on fuel tax revenues. We're seeing a projection by the Ledge Analyst's Office of a diminishment of $5 billion over the next 5 years. And so there are organizations that are coming together to see what they can do about it. What would be a replacement tax for the fuel tax, the excise tax we have on gas and diesel? and they're taking a look at it. You'll hear from time to time about a road user charge. I wouldn't be afraid of a road user charge yet. I know first and foremost, you always think of, well, you know, I don't want to have to pay to get on the freeway because I've already paid to get on the freeway in the past. Well, it would replace the fuel tax. And so that's the goal, that's the objective. It's not to increase it, but, and I'm not trying to give excuses to it. I'm just giving you my take on what's going on. We're going to see some efforts. There's a bill that's been introduced by the chair of the Assembly Transportation Committee, Assemblymember Lori Wilson from Solano County, that would extend, it's a spot bill, it's a stalking horse placeholder bill right now. She wanted to introduce it to hold hearings around, so we have public hearing of what are the issues, what are the privacy issues, what are the revenue issues, what are the implications of how big it should be. All that will be discussed and hashed out publicly. It's not going to be done in a dark room in the back of the Capitol. So I'm got a hopeful that that'll turn up something that is going to be satisfactory to the people. It could go haywire. So I just want to put
I'm
this
sorry,
out.
is that the road user charge?
Correct. That's one of them. They're looking at us.
They had a joint
Yes.
informational hearing, I think, in January, right?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, I'll admit here, up until January, I was working for the organization that asked for that to be
Oh,
done,
okay.
Transportation California. But as I'm getting ready to start thinking about fixing to retire someday in the future, I had to start letting a couple clients off, and that was one that I just had a lot of work facing me. So I know a lot about that program. So if you have questions as we go through the next year or two, I'll be glad to come in and sit in and answer them. Last things, the legislature had their first really good transportation committee meetings this week. There wasn't anything chewable in on the agendas, but they started getting together and working together as committee members, and so that's a welcome sight. The budget subcommittee for transportation is meeting this afternoon. I will note there is one item on there that, oddly enough, doesn't directly affect PCTPA, but is beneficial to Placer County, and that's a proposal to modify the formula for TRPA area, for the TRPA area. So the portion
Okay.
of Tahoe that is not within the PCTPA boundaries would be part of the TRPA area. And the idea is to say, instead of 40,000 is the population for the basin, they're just going to put an artificial number of 140,000 in terms of the population. That'll have effect on TDA, LTF, and other, well, LTF, I hadn't thought about that. I'll have to look more deeply into this. But anyway, that item is up today on the committee. It's going to be discussed, but they're not going to make a decision yet. So,
And it's in the first house, has it?
yeah, it's a first subcommittee hearing it all. Sorry, this thing. Sorry. So I'm complete with my discussion today and happy to answer questions if you have any.
Any questions?
I do, I have a question. The road user tax that you were talking about, is that the same as the pilot program that we had heard from the League of Cities?
Right.
Like where
so
they're talking about maybe going through the DMV
Yeah.
and using the DMV as a source to tax the citizens at the end of, I don't know,
It is.
is it
And
a quarter or how, do you know how that's gonna work?
Yeah,
Yes.
Mark, I'll be happy to jump in on this one, too. It is, and as Mark said, currently, the piloted timeline expires in 30, or is it 25?
25.
25. And so the bill that Wilson has introduced is to extend that so that pilot can take more time over time. Now, you're hitting on one of the issues. And the question is, if you were going to go to a road usage charge, and remember, the state's definition of that, because there's different definitions across the U.S., is just to replace the state fuel tax, not to try to mitigate for congestion or raise more money. It's just to say, if we currently have a state fuel tax at 58 or 60 cents, whatever it is, what would it take on a per mile basis to level that out and get rid of state gas taxes? That's full stop its purpose. One of the big questions in there then is technically how do we do that? Do we put a transponder in your car? Do we hook something up to your OBU, which is what, auto mechanics do to like get fault codes? That's something that the state of California tested probably 7 or 8 years ago. They looked at all different levels of technology. Now the easy button is, well, why would we do that? We have this administrative sort of apparatus set up that's called the DMV. People have to go into the DMV. They could go in, we could just read their mileage and then say, well, last year it was this year it's, do the math and times it. So that is exactly what they want to work through. There's the privacy, sort of the public communications aspect, the revenue, and also the technical. And that's what, the state wants to look at over the next, 5 or 10 years.
Here in California?
Well, there's been several pilots, and they were statewide. And they would post on the CTC, the Transportation Commission website, the availability of the public to ask. It was all volunteer.
It was voluntary,
And it was-
and it was not real money.
Right.
Yeah.
And beyond just being volunteer, it was also diced and sliced in terms of rural and urban participants, commercial vehicles, passenger vehicles, including low or high efficiency vehicles like EVs.
Yeah.
So they had the whole the whole fleet included as participants.
The idea there was to sort of get a sense of what would you have to charge on a per mile basis to get some actual user data to understand what would it be a straight replacement, and also to sort of test some of this technology. But as Mark said, fully voluntary, and it wasn't, and I'm not, this isn't a criticism of it, it wasn't real money. It was just a test. So only the state of Hawaii so far nationally has gone for this. They're an island, kind of easy to do.
Yeah.
But this is something that the state's moving forward with and very serious about.
Commissioner DiMattei, I see your lights up. Did you?
No.
Oh,
Yeah, I had a
Commissioner
question.
Brown
about that,
pushed your
too.
button.
Just out of curiosity, how do they consider, or has the question been raised with this? What if you travel out of state? What if you're on vacation? I mean, how do you do that?
Well, they have looked at that, and there's two ways to that question. One is when a Californian is out of state, it's not charged. The way they've modeled it now. And they've tried to model people coming into the state, how would you deal with that? But there were none of them that were participating in the pilot program. So they're working at how do you deal with in-state, out-of-state, and they're looking at other states. There's a large coalition across the country of states participating, and they're going to take a very close look at it.
Yeah, and just a quick kick in on that. You're getting at it, right? You're getting at some of the potential issues with this that the state's trying to ferret out and understand. And I would add one to your list, and that's goods movement, right? So, yeah, there's you driving to Vegas or something or to Reno, but there's also all of that 5-axle truck traffic coming in and out of California, right?
Uh-huh.
So, over 95% of all freight companies are 10 trucks or less. They're not UPS, they're not FedEx, they're not Walmart.
Right.
They're small operators. And if they have one set of rules for California and another for the rest of the US, that's going to be problematic. And so California's going to have to work with either the Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance, which is this
Right.
national, and the federal government to understand this. And this is
Yeah.
what California's trying to understand.
Yeah,
Director
a
Broadway.
couple ideas on that too, but.
Mark, just understanding it takes forever, unfortunately, for these pilots and the processes, and there's a lot, as you hear from this board, of questions regarding how you deal with many facets of tracking and then applying charges. I've heard 5 to 10 years potentially of testing this. Well, the problem is we don't have 5 or 10 years that we can allow for a process to occur without finding some way to address the gap. Because that is just increasing daily, given increased fuel efficiencies and transitions to fully electric vehicles. So has there been any discussion on how short-term you address the shortfall in revenues that has been generated and was expected to come from the fuel tax that is no longer being collected?
There's been no direct discussion about that yet. There's been a hurry up. All of a sudden, we realize this $5 billion diminishment in the overall pot is coming up on us fast. So that's why the chair decided to author the bill, but there's been no discussion that you've mentioned. There has also been kind of would address it in a way, and that's the administration started to put together, or did put together briefly, a pricing study group. I was on it, and they brought some specialist in from Southern California to work at Caltrans, and then it went away. They've done nothing. So I think they were told by the governor, you're getting too close to something that's too touchy, so stop it. So right now, there is no look directly at what do we do in the meantime. We're just going to have to see local streets and roads funding out of SB1 probably go a little flattened down. And the same with the state SHOP program, which is important to this area because that's how you get all the big freeways and 49 work done is through the SHOP program. So you're going to see a slowdown in Caltrans going to contract, I think, over the next 3 to 4 or 5 years.
Which is
Director-
going to diminish the, sorry.
Okay, I want to get Director DiMattei in
Okay.
before he has to leave. So could we hold
ahead.
your
Yeah.
second question? And then
Yeah,
let
just
Director
quick,
DiMattei-
sorry, I have to go to a LAFCO meeting. You go to other states and there's tolls everywhere, right? Gas is extremely cheaper than it is obviously here in California. Is there something that we could just move that like they have in the Bay Area throughout the whole state and get rid of the gas tax? And what is the benefit or not benefit? Can we still collect the same amount of money? And it's a user-based, basically.
Yeah, so I will tell you what the sort of transportation professionals, my peers across the state, folks at Caltrans are looking at. The way they're looking at the introduction of pricing inside of the state of California is twofold. One, there would be some sort of RUC, road usage charge, and that would be to straight replace the motor fuel tax, right? You're still going to have this congestion problem to mitigate for. So what they would say then is we would then look at corridor by corridor, certain commute sheds, and we would put express lanes onside of that. That's inside of SACOG's blueprint plan. That's something we'll talk about more later this morning as part of my executive director's report. And so you'd have sort of 2 tiers of pricing. You would have specific pricing inside of a corridor to solve an operational problem. That money by state law has to remain inside of that corridor, right? Which is a good thing for Placer. We like that. And we would then look to solve for this revenue, this general revenue decline with something that the state would administer through road usage charge. Privacy, how that would be done, and actually then what those use of revenues would be, all to be determined. And I'll just say quickly while I have the mic to Director Broadway's question, one of the near-term solutions that we'll probably get to, though the politics are hard and they haven't gotten there yet, is they could simply just raise the EV registration fee, right? They could just double it. And I mean, registration fees in the state of California are about half of all transportation funding anyways, at the state pie. So that would be my guess.
If it cuts out the city and local taxes, if the money has to stay within its toll district, then can't we just somehow distribute that money throughout the county within the city percentage-wise, right? If we know that they're entering on Sunset and getting off at Blue Oaks or wherever, right? We know you could track where that money is going, or they're going all the way to Sacramento, coming in, or they're coming in from Nevada, whether it's a 5-axle or a passenger car. We wouldn't be able to track where that money is and keep it within our own jurisdictions that way and pay for everything.
Yep, the ability to technically do that today exists with technology. You don't need
Right.
any sort of advancement. You could do that today. It'll get around sort of the politics of it,
Right.
and sort of the setting of the table and the legislation as to how that funding is split. And that's why we want to and do have a voice regionally through CARTA right now, because that's our future, and we want to make sure we have a seat at that table.
So how does Bay Area Fast Track move so fast, and we seem like at a snail's pace trying to get stuff like that here?
Oh, I would say it didn't move quickly.
Well, there's that.
Yeah, I would actually say it didn't move as fast as you thought, as you think.
Right.
It probably took them over a decade. They were converting high occupancy vehicle lanes. And truthfully, what they were trying to do is, you have to remember too, in the Bay Area, they have 7 revenue producing bridges that produce about $6 billion a year.
Right.
They didn't care about revenue for their express lanes. They were just under so much pressure to deal with the degradation issue inside of the express lane that's what drove them to price those lanes. So the policies by which they price them and what they do with that revenue is a very different model. We would never want to replicate that, because we actually want to produce positive revenue to then subsidize other transportation problems.
Right.
That board, and again, it's not a judgment, but what drove them and their vision for that was, let's protect our toll bridge revenue. And if we don't make any money, even if we lose a little on these express lanes, that's okay. Southern California does it a lot differently. I would say they do it with more of a focus on revenue. And we'd want to probably look to that model a lot more than just to the Bay Area.
Yeah, I would imagine, I mean, how can you look at a bridge compared to a highway? You need the bridge, right? They're not going to drive all the way around San Mateo to get to San Jose.
There you go.
Right, so they're going to have to go across there.
That's right.
It's almost a necessity, so
Right,
here, we don't have that option.
right. And my only point is the entity that was implementing, not the only entity, but one of them that drove sort of the original sort of ideas around express lanes in the Bay Area also had control of those bridges. And so, right, they really wanted to make sure that any sort of questions around transit usage, equity, and things like that were left to the express lanes, and the revenue of those bridges were left intact.
Do the express lanes, because obviously you can use them if you have a toll pass, right? You don't have to be with two people most of the time. You could pay the extra toll.
Correct.
So does that in theory move more traffic because you're pulling people from the 1 and 2 lanes into the number 3 lane to go?
In theory, what it says is right now people violate because they don't have 1 or 2 people. And now you give them a legal option to buy their way into the lane with that toll.
Right.
So you should get to that theoretical 1,800 vehicles per hour per lane maximum that you can achieve in an underperforming HOV lane, in theory.
Right.
Now, if you already have a violation rate where that lane is filling with one, a CHP officer can only pull over 4 people an hour, right? So, but yes, that is the theory behind why pricing would fill that lane completely.
Well, this has been a wonderful
there you
exhibition
go.
of your brains, okay?
Well, thank you.
I think you have to go now, don't you? All right.
Take me out, I'll be done asking questions.
No, those are, I mean, that's fascinating, deep dive into all of the intricacies of pricing, congestion. Director Broadway, you were kind enough to hold off on your second question.
Absolutely. Just quickly, Mark, recommendations relative to what this body, what we can as elected officials individually do to ensure that we're encouraging those elected who may be less inclined because of concerns about reelection to take these difficult actions. What can we do to kind of push those issues, because we can't have this gap. Our roads, our ability to maintain the infrastructure we currently have, not just to address future needs, but address what we have, is at risk. It can't wait for 10 years for someone to complete a study to come up with a solution, because we know the billions of dollars of gaps. So what would you recommend?
Well, we have new members in the legislature that drape over the county. So as a group, it'd be nice to have meetings with them. Because particularly the one that replaced Mrs. Dolly in the assembly, very good staff. I've been meeting with them off and on. They just need some help getting to understand what your needs are in Placer County. You're probably the most populous county in her district, I think. So I think it would be good to get to know her and her staff pretty well. Like maybe a mini cap-to-cap, something like that. Just invite them down or have them come tour the most wonderful project in the world, which is this 80 project that's coming to a conclusion. It has made my life, is going to make my life so much easier after 30 years up here. She needs to see how these things come about, and that was something that your board and your staff were able to get done. I didn't think would ever happen because of the change in emphasis in the capital. So this board did a great job getting that project accepted within one of the new competitive programs. So I really think you probably want to have a meeting with her, bring her down, bring the Senator Dolly down, and go through what your needs are. You did a great job with Representative Kiley. I've watched him over the years. He's gone from this to I'll help you in Washington, which is a big move. And I think this board can do the same thing with your 2 representatives, maybe 3 representatives.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, no, thank you. Any other questions,
Just one.
Mark?
Me?
Yeah, yes? Director Jones?
Good morning. The question is transportation in general. I read where they're working on a bill to allow larger trucks on our roadways. You know, how is that?
Yeah, it's,
And they've been trying to do that for a number of years.
they have. You're talking about triple trailers and things like that? I haven't seen a bill introduced on that yet, so, you know, if they're talking about it at the Truckers Association or some other organization, it hasn't made it public yet. To operate on the state highway system that are federally funded, it would probably need to get some acquiescence at the federal level at the same time.
Right.
So that's probably easier now than it had been in the last couple
Yeah.
of administrations. I'll keep an eye out for that.
Okay.
I'll talk to the folks at CTA just off the cuff. What are you guys planning? And I'll come back with a short note
Right.
to them.
Because it's going to be a larger burden on our roadways that the state can't maintain as it is.
Yeah,
You know,
the effective an 80,000 pounder, and I'll be quick, I'm sorry. But, you know, a twin, 80,000 pound max is 10,000 times the impact by that one vehicle versus a whole lane of passenger vehicles.
Exactly. And the other thing too that's of great concern is all of those big trucks, they come down, they get off at Eureka, come down either Eureka, Hazel, or something like that.
Right.
To get themselves from 50 to 80, that interchange. And so those are our local roads, again, that are going to be highly impacted. I mean, our roads are terrible as it is.
And they're not even built to the standards that the state uses on the freeway system. So, yeah, it's even more damaging.
So talk about, you know, figuring out ways to pay for new roads. Well, we probably ought to think about making more money than we need to right today because of those issues. Thank you for that.
Real quick question for education. So does the SHOP program fund on-ramps to state highways
For repair and reconstruction
or resurfacing?
and resurfacing, but generally not new.
Yeah,
For
okay,
example, Foothill Bridge here in Auburn, someday they're going to actually repair that so you can drive across it, repave it.
right. So there's a priority list
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
can see somewhere, because as I was coming to the meeting this morning and getting off of Blue Oaks onto 65 South, I mean, that interchange is just deteriorating rapidly. So, I mean, that on-ramp.
Yeah, I hear what you're
Anyway.
saying. And I didn't mean Foothill Bridge itself, I meant the bridge at the Arco Station.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, yeah, that's crazy too. All right, if there are no other questions from the board, I'll open it for public comment. And then I'll bring it back. This is an action item. Is there anything with respect to the legislative priorities that the board would like to comment on or change, or should we just go with a motion?
Pretty comprehensive, and I'll move adoption.
Okay,
I second.
all right. We're violating my rule already.
We
All right.
have less
The boss
people
of
on the
me,
side now,
Chairman.
so.
That's right.
Moved by Down Covey, seconded by Cortez. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Those abstain? Thanks very much for
Thank you
the
for having
education and insight. And retire soon, okay?
I don't want him to retire soon. He does a great job.
I was going to say, wait a minute, we didn't say we wanted him to retire.
Ignore the
Well,
chair.
no,
been
Mark,
overruled.
come back. If you start planning today for your retirement, just think of this as a Caltrans project. First you put in the project description, then you gotta go through the EIR, then you gotta go, you'll be retired in 2038, right?
And I can make it last longer by doing some infill with it and getting that through the planning commission in Placer County, because they're really tough.
Thank you for your report. All right. Next up, we have item J, and this is the federal legislative program. Matt, do you want to kick us off on this? Or
Yeah,
right to
I'll
Mike
kick us
Miller?
off as Mike's coming on camera, and we get his slide deck queued up. I think, Corey, if you could go to his first slide. So again, like our state program, this is our federal update, and I appreciate the board's patience with this. We usually do this in January. We moved this out, one, because we had a big substantial presidential election, and because we also know that not everyone is going to go to cap, and in the last 2 years, on that Sunday, we went by our lobbyist office and were treated to an update by Mike. And so we want to sort of bring that west, bring it home here so everybody could have that benefit, because we knew not everybody would be traveling to DC. So the action, this is action, we are actually acting you to, excuse me, I'm tongue-tied, asking you to adopt our federal legislative program. We've got a big year coming up with authorization or reauthorization that Mike likes to talk about is authorization. There's obviously, everything that happened with the continuing resolution and what that did to congressional directed spendings and then future CDS requests. So with that, Mike, I'll give you the mic, and I'll be here to also help answer questions. Mike, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Matt. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk with you all today. I wish I could be there in person, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Unfortunately, in fact, I hope to be there in person, but there's frankly just too much going on in the next several weeks to leave. So anyway, I apologize for not being there in person, but glad to be with you virtually today. On my screen, by the way, I cannot see you folks. I can only see the slide deck. So if I'm going on too long, or if you have any questions, please, interrupt me, and I'll answer any questions that you have as they arise. Just real briefly, if you could go to the next slide, just a brief introduction to my firm, the Ferguson Group, or TFG. Was founded in 1982. We have represented cities and counties, not only in California, but in states around the country for over 40 years. And again, our focus is primarily on local and regional government, including transportation planning agencies, cities, counties, special districts, and other public and private agencies that focus in on local government and its interaction with the federal government. We do represent a number of agencies and entities in the Sacramento area. In fact, I've represented the city of Roseville since 2001. So we know your area where, and just a little bit of background on myself. Prior to starting my work with the Ferguson Group 28 years ago, I worked on Capitol Hill for 8 years for Robert Matsui as his counsel. And that's how I got to know a lot about transportation and how Congress works in terms of transportation. So if you could go to the next slide. I know everyone in this room is aware that, this is a unique year. Every year is a unique year, but this is truly a unique experience in Washington and throughout the country as it relates to the federal government. And, frankly, we are continuing to, try to understand, the direction that Congress and the administration is going to go, particularly in transportation policy. And in fairness to the new administration, all new administrations go through a process of reviewing, the current status of transportation policy and programs, and trying to make those programs and projects align with the priorities of the new administration. This administration has probably been more vocal, and it's been there's been a lot more attention paid for many reasons to the actions that the new administration has taken, not only in transportation, but in many areas of the federal government's operations. And just a couple of examples of areas that I think are relevant to Placer County Transportation Planning Agency and your member agencies. And again, this is in no particular order, but just things that we're keeping an eye on and how they affect PCTPA's priorities and efforts on Capitol Hill and in the administration. The Department of Transportation and the administration has taken action to remove social justice and environmental agenda, that's their terminology, criteria from infrastructure decision-making. And that's not just policy, but that also relates to grant applications. As we experienced earlier this year, we assisted PCTPA in writing and submitting an application under the BUILD program, a grant application for the 8065 project, a portion of it. And about a week before the due date, there were significant changes put in place by the new administration, and we needed to make some quick adjustments to our application. Some of those we anticipated, but some were a bit surprising. But I think that we successfully aligned the application with the administration's priorities, and that's a pending application. So, but one of the items that came up in the rewrite of the application was making adjustments to the Department of Transportation and the administration's interest in shifting away from social justice and environmental priorities that were held by the previous administration. Another interesting action that the administration has taken recently, the Secretary of Transportation has issued an internal direction that virtually all grant programs, be they competitive grants or discretionary grants, and to a certain extent, formula funding grants or formula funded grants. There will be a review, or there's an ongoing review, to see whether there are elements of those programs that are not aligned with the current administration's policies. And if those programs are found to have elements that are not in line, then there will be a project review of grants associated with those programs. And they're not only looking at grants moving forward, but they're looking back in time to grants that were awarded under any laws that were passed or grants that were awarded starting in January of 2021. There are a lot of questions about this action, what that might mean for grant recipients. It's fairly clear, although we don't know for sure, but it's fairly clear that if you have already spent the dollars associated with a grant, then there won't be an attempt to claw back those dollars. If you have obligated funds under a grant during that time frame, then there's a possibility that the administration will look at elements that are not in line with the current administration's policies and are not required by law, and they might require scope changes to ongoing projects. And the option possibly might be to either redirect funds that you received under a grant to elements of a project that are in line with the administration's policies, or the total grant amount might be reduced based on the amount of money that would need to go to the element that is excluded by the administration. That's a ongoing process. It's going to be very interesting to see how that comes out, and there might be some litigation associated with that action. You're probably all aware that there's been significant efforts to reduce the federal workforce. Some agencies have been a higher priority for reductions than others, and I'm using that term workforce reduction. There's actually some terms of art involved in this, reductions in force and workforce reduction, but I'm using this sort of generically in this case. I think everybody is aware of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, that is providing recommendations regarding cost-cutting measures And one of those areas that they have been very active in is reducing the number of federal workers. And I pointed out several of the agencies within the Department of Transportation where it appears some of those cuts have been targeted. The numbers are really sort of unclear where we stand right now because there have been some folks who have retired. There have been some folks who have been fired or laid off, and some of those folks have been brought back in for a number of reasons. So, and that's another thing that we're going to be watching carefully, and that either directly or indirectly impacts PCTPA. If you have fewer people in a position, the agency might be running more efficiently. However, you have fewer people to review grant applications and to administer those grants if they're received. So again, that's an area that we'll be watching very carefully moving forward, as I'm sure you are. One action that's recently been taken, and this doesn't just apply really to the Department of, to transportation, but it impacts local and regional government in many ways, is a very recent executive order that you can see it on the screen. This is just a portion of the EO. That states that the U.S. State and local governments should play a more active and significant role in national resilience and preparedness. And this has actually, there was a hearing, I believe yesterday, on Capitol Hill where the House was looking at sort of this similar issue, and that is, should the federal government continue to take on the role that it does in emergency preparedness, response, and recovery? And it's pretty clear that these look at the possibility of shifting a significant amount of responsibility for preparedness, response, and recovery to states, regional, and local governments. And not just the planning, not just the action, but also the funding of those efforts. That's something that we're going to really keep a close eye on because that could turn out to be a pretty significant cost to state and local governments moving forward. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, and I'll try and move a little bit quicker through this. I am keeping an eye on the time. I realize I've gone about 13 minutes, and I'll try and be a little bit quicker. There's a lot going on in this Congress, and you're probably aware that one of the big areas of interest right now is Congress and the administration sort of staking out their power, essentially. Their areas of jurisdiction, what they can and cannot do, and this is going to be something that's likely to go on for weeks or even months, and maybe even longer than that, as the administration continues to test the borders of separation of powers. When you talk with folks on Capitol Hill, it's the sort of official line always is Congress passes laws and the administration enforces the laws, and the courts say what the law is. And some of the actions of the administration have received some responses from some members of Congress that perhaps the administration might be overstepping its jurisdiction as it relates to separation of powers. And that will have direct impacts on transportation funding, how that comes out. Congress authorizes and appropriates funds for transportation projects and programs, and the administration in enforcing those laws, is supposed to, within certain parameters, carry forward those. But this administration, is looking at ways to make sure that transportation dollars are not spent in ways that it doesn't want to spend them. So it's set up for a big fight, and that's going to be ongoing. One thing that is coming up is the transportation authorization bill. The current authorization for all transportation programs and projects, federal, is the IIJA or BIL. That large infrastructure bill included transportation authorization, and that bill sunsets September of 2026. So this year, Congress, especially the House, has already begun taking up hearings to start to figure out what this new transportation bill is going to look like. And as Matt mentioned earlier, a lot of folks in the past referred to this process as transportation reauthorization. And in many ways, I think that was accurate because, in many cases, the new transportation authorization bills would, by and large, take a lot of prior programs and projects, carry them forward with sort of, minor changes. There were some, large changes in some of the bills, but by and large, there was a lot of reauthorization going on. And I think that we might be looking at something, different in this round. We might be looking at a fundamental shift in transportation policy, and that's why I call it transportation authorization as opposed to reauthorization this year. And by the way, I heard one of the questions regarding the larger, heavier trucks being authorized. And last year, there was a bill introduced in Congress that would have authorized funding for a pilot program for larger and heavier trucks to operate in several states to test that operation. And that bill failed, but it's likely that that bill will come up again, possibly in the context of transportation authorization. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as well. As the process moves forward, the transportation authorization process moves forward, PCTPA is really well positioned in terms of your House and Senate delegation members. Congressman Kiley sits on the House T&I committee and on the roads subcommittee, as does our neighbor to the north, Mr. LaMalfa, who has met with PCTPA folks in DC in the past and has been very helpful, has offered to be very helpful to PCTPA in support of Mr. Kiley. On the Senate side, both Senator Padilla and Senator Schiff are members of the Environment and Public Works Committee, as well as the subcommittee that authorizes funding for roads, bridges, and other surface transportation projects. And the reason that the membership on those committees is important is that in the past, a significant amount of earmarks have been included in prior bills. Now, they were not included in the BIL, and the last House version of transportation authorization did include earmarks. However, they were much smaller than we've seen in past bills. So what's going to be interesting this year is, A, whether transportation authorization stands alone, which I think it will. I don't think it's going to be folded into a larger infrastructure bill once again, like the BIL bill was. As part of that, it will be interesting to see whether earmarks for specific projects will be included in this round of transportation authorization. And just by way of example, several authorization bills ago, the city of Roseville received over $80 million for the Interstate 80 widening project. So that was, sort of the scale. That was a very large earmark for that bill. It wasn't the largest by any stretch. There's actually one close to $1 billion for a bridge here in DC. The size of the earmarks in the last version of the House authorization bill that was dropped in favor of the BIL, the earmarks were more in the sort of $1 to $10 million range, so much smaller than we'd seen previously. And it'll be interesting to see whether Congress goes ahead and adopts, which of those approaches it adopts, larger or smaller earmarks, or none at all. Real briefly on earmarks, as was mentioned previously, the FY25 budget was finally concluded with the continuing resolution, which ended up dropping all earmarks nationwide. The FY26 earmark process is well underway, as I'm sure y'all are aware. And in fact, the senators' deadlines for project requests are this Friday and Monday. Mr. Schiff is this Friday, and Senator Padilla is Monday. I'll stop there, and I'm sorry that I went a little longer than I'd anticipated, but happy to answer questions, and if I can't answer them, I'll follow up as soon as I can.
Great. Matt, you have anything to close us out on this one? All right, Mike, you're doing good work back there under unusual times. I think we've all, whether it's been at the League of Cities or CalCog, heard your counterparts describe the environment in which the new administration is in a incredible learning curve, sometimes to the point where they don't recognize what they're asking for. Do any of the directors have any questions or comments of Mr. Miller? Yes, Director Broadway.
Yeah, just a quick question. We talked previously from a state perspective about our gas tax. We also know the federal gas tax. The Highway Trust Fund since 2008 has had a shortfall due to both the lack of an inflationary adjustment in the federal gas tax as well as the increased efficiencies of vehicles. So we've continuously seen a struggle there. You talk about the refocus on where funding is derived from. What can we expect relative to actions being taken, given we do rely upon federal highway funds moving forward, and what discussions do we need to be engaged in relative to our elected officials, relative to looking at how this is addressed? We know that the trust fund was relying upon general funds to fill that void that was being created. That's not something I see continuing with this administration. So what is our go-forward strategy? What do we need to be thinking about, and what action should we be engaged in?
It's an excellent question, and that's sort of the other side of the transportation authorization or companion effort with transportation authorization. The House Transportation Infrastructure Committee is responsible for identifying policy and program priorities for the federal government. The House Ways and Means and Senate Finance Committees are responsible for the taxing side. And whenever we get to a point where transportation authorization starts coming up and is discussed and debated, increasing the federal federal gas tax, always comes up. And in the last several versions of transportation authorization, there's been, at the end, no action in terms of increasing gas tax. And there's a myriad of reasons for why the gas tax hasn't been raised over the past many years, and but that will likely be one of the discussion points as we move through transportation authorization. The administration has a very will play a pivotal role in that discussion on whether the federal gas tax is addressed in Congress. And it's something that we need to keep an eye on, absolutely, because that's part of how these funds are raised to a large part. How they're raised to handle transportation projects. So there's no clear ways and means or finance effort at this point. So we're going to have to see how that takes shape, I think, in the coming months before we can, really identify a good strategy, for PCTPA in terms of, trying to make sure that your voice is heard on the taxing issue. But it's going to be a critical component of it.
Thank you.
Any other directors have any questions of Mr. Miller?
Chairman, just
Yep.
really quickly, thank you very much for bringing up Executive Order 239 and keeping us apprised of that as it moves down the pipeline with regards to the transfer of emergency preparedness and resiliency transferring to the state and locals. So I can appreciate that element of local control, but I'd like to see the dollars behind it. So if they're going to give us that, we need the money too. So thank you for keeping us apprised of that.
Thank you. Any comments on the proposal for the federal legislative program? It's an action item. I'll open it for public comment. Close public comment. Entertain a motion from Director Brown and second by Director Doughton Cavillo.
Yes, I would definitely move.
I'll second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
It
Thank you
was
very much.
osmosis. We were doing that through osmosis, it's kind of.
Next, and timely, the traffic volume update. Corey?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members of the board, and I'll be brief on this item. Just a kind of quick background on why we do a traffic update. So this is something that staff brought to the board periodically, kind of in the post-COVID lead up as traffic started to move back to normal from the pandemic, and we took a break from that and then have brought it back since to every 6 months to really monitor what's happening on our major corridors on 65, on 80, and a couple of key corridors up in the Tahoe area. So looking at the 65 corridor, and I'll kind of explain what this data is. This is average speed showing in the AM and the PM peak periods. So this would be like your really peak commute times. So 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And then there's some charts that show it across the whole day, and I'll explain kind of why, especially on 65, that's relevant. This is speed data that's taken from cell phone pings and connected vehicle pings, so it's aggregated to where you can't. There's no private information. It's all aggregated into speed data that can be accessed and averaged out to track what's happening on our freeways. In the AM peak period on 65 is really kind of business as usual. We're not seeing a lot of changes year over year from 2023 to 24. The average speed southbound continues to be pretty poor in the mornings, as I'm sure most of you have noticed. In the PM peak period, we are seeing a little bit of improvement on northbound 65, but to be honest, it's still in the 30 to 40 range. So to most people, that would still seem, pretty slow. And then in the southbound, we are continuing to see deteriorating speeds on the average of about 3 to 5 miles per hour every single year. And as Matt will explain in his executive director's report, there's more coming, so more traffic coming. So we're working to help reimagine that section of 65 to do something about that. Looking at these charts, I know this is a lot of information. What I really want to point out is if you look at each of these charts kind of in between the peak periods in the AM and the PM, that especially at Blue Oaks and Pleasant Grove Boulevard, that traffic is there all day long. So typically we see these peaks in the morning and the afternoon as people head to work and then they head home. On 65 southbound, there is traffic from about 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., more or less. And what you'll see is if you look at specifically 2024 and pre-pandemic levels of 2019, that's continued to get worse, especially southbound at Pleasant Grove. We're really seeing that kind of flattening out of that curve to where it's pretty much staying a consistent 30 miles an hour all the way from 7 a.m. up to 5 p.m. On the 80 corridor, in the mornings, we're seeing pretty typical average speeds around the speed limit. And then in the PM peak is where we're seeing some kind of mixed changes in the eastbound. They're improving slightly, but going down a little bit in the westbound. Of course, some of this could be affected by construction that's been happening over the last couple of years for the I-80 Aux Lanes project. For the 24-hour periods, really what we're seeing in kind of the post-pandemic world on 80 is that westbound, especially in the PM peak, continues to get worse, especially if you look at who are on westbound at Douglas and westbound at Taylor. In the pre-pandemic 2019 levels, we were seeing a slight dip below what we consider the free flow speed, which is about 55 to 65. Now we're seeing it somewhere in the order of about 30 to 40 on average every single day during the weekdays. Moving up the hill to Tahoe, looking at 89. This is kind of in December, so obviously weather can be a factor in these speeds, but we're seeing mostly business as usual on 89, averaging around 30 to 40 miles an hour, which is pretty typical for December, that time of year, both in the AM and the PM. And then you see kind of across the day, there's not huge dips, consistent with the fact that there's not a huge commute pattern up in the Tahoe area, but it's a lot of, weekend traffic, a lot of ski season traffic in December, and mostly staying consistent across the whole day. On Highway 267, we're seeing very similar results where it's mostly consistent across the day, and we're seeing pretty flat speeds from 2023 to 2024, with a little bit of slowing in the afternoon there around Truckee Airport Road. There's a signal there that helps to back things up a little bit. All right, so kind of in summary, we're seeing some, improving or remaining flat speeds on 80 and mixed on 65 in the mornings. The PM speeds, we're seeing a lot worse results. It's getting worse on 65, especially in the southbound direction. A little bit improvement in the northbound, but for most people that are driving that corridor, they won't see much of a difference. It's a matter of a few miles an hour here or there. So really in the afternoon, we're still seeing very slow speeds, both northbound and southbound on 65. No drastic changes in the 24-hour view, but again, that curve throughout the day continues to flatten, where we're seeing more and more traffic building up in the middle of the day on 65. And as a Roseville resident, I can tell you that it is backing up also on the weekends too, in the middle of the day and on Sundays too. And then again, on 89 to 67, mostly mixed results, pretty typical traffic for December, where there's not huge peaks and valleys, at least on the weekdays. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks for speeding through that. Any observations or questions?
Just one. So in the past, Corey, we've also utilized the traffic volumes as opposed to just simply looking at speeds, because there's other factors, of course, that can weigh in there. But I know there are also, and I think you've explained previously, some of the challenges. Can you walk us through why speed is the primary area? And then in the future, say, for example, we have enhancements that are made and we really want to understand, is it a true comparison of the amount of volume that's on there? Or are we seeing increases given the building of a SAC State/Sierra College facility and classes out on Placer Parkway? Is that additional volume, or are there other factors? And is it volume on the roadway versus just speeds itself? So can you walk us through that?
Sure. Yeah, and there's a couple reasons why we look at speed as opposed to volume as we did in the past. The short answer is we can pretty easily get volume data for all of our freeways, all the state highways. Caltrans has a pretty robust data depository that's all online and publicly accessible for us, and we can go pull that data, pretty easily. And then they have, those little inductive loops on the freeways where they drive over the loop and it counts a car and it can count speed and all sorts of different fun things. The reason that we stopped using that is we started to see that a lot of the counters would go down periodically. The data wasn't super reliable, and we really had trouble drawing good conclusions from the data, or kind of being, I guess, assured of its accuracy. And so that's where we started using the speed data, which is actually from a company called INRIX, and they take essentially pings from cell phones and connected vehicles to aggregate this data and come up with essentially what we see now, which is the speed data. Another reason why we look at speed specifically is because, irregardless of volume, that is what people experience on a day-to-day basis. Whether there's 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 cars on the freeway is, I wouldn't say irrelevant to the user, but what they're seeing is, and what they're feeling is the speed. So, even as Placer 1 comes online, as Sac State comes online, if we continue to make improvements to 65, whether they add 10,000 cars to the freeway, if we can get them going faster, that's what they're going to feel. And so that's why we look at that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add that what's not captured in this and related to the volume is the volume of people that are finding Sunset Boulevard, Fitterman, Industrial, other roads, other surface transportation streets. So anyway, thanks for that insightful question. Appreciate it. Our executive director is going to report to us now.
And the executive director will go fast because some of this.
Would you speed through it?
I can speed through it, but I do have to first give you a
Don't
teaser.
rush though, but speed.
Speed. April 23rd meeting, it's going to be a quick one. It's a light agenda, so Sparta, and I know Director Brown, you're excited for a Sparta board meeting. That's going to start at 10 instead of 10:45. So
Okay.
just a heads up for all of you on that one. What I really want to talk about is just quickly, Mark came up here and he told you about the funding uncertainty. And I would just really simply put that into the words, we can't count on the state. And then Mike talked to you about everything that's going on at the federal level, and I would just call that generally just overall uncertainty. And, and it's hard to count on that in a reliable fashion. So this brings me back to something we messaged when we were going through the measure conversation, which was the fact that we needed to rely on ourselves. And that remains true evermore, right? And quickly, you and Mike talked about that the build grant is in. We will be briefing Jack Thompson, Kylie's new district aide, this week. It was supposed to be last week. That's why the slide says briefed, but it's going to be brief because we had to move out that meeting. And you also know that we put in a grant through Solutions for Congested Corridor. I had a really good meeting with Mark and CTC Commissioner Cruz, who represents us. He's in full support. That is the only SCCP grant in Caltrans District 3 and in Northern California and in the SACOG region. So we feel good about that, even though it'll be a very competitive process. Leading me to the third bullet, our reimagineering or the pivot on State Road 65. Rick and myself and Corey met with District 3 up in Marysville to get internal alignment on what we could do since it's their road. We will be having a secondary meeting with their technical team in April. And so all of that gets to the crescendo of we will be putting forward a project initiation document or a PID, which is the first step in the Caltrans process, most likely in late summer or fall. Rick is working on the RFP right now, and that PID is to evaluate adding new tolled express lanes in the middle of State Road 65. So for clarity, that part of project scope, southbound 65, that is in for the build grant remains, and that would remain as that one general purpose lane and aux lane, in between generally Blue Oaks and Galleria, and then Pleasant Grove and Galleria. That stays the same. But then the big question is, what do we do into the future when we want to go from 4 general purpose lanes to 6, pushing the corridor into the middle? And what we'd like to evaluate with a PID is between Galleria and up into Lincoln, those 2 internal lanes being tolled express lanes. And that is something that has not been looked at and is not environmentally cleared. And that's the purpose of the PID. Mark talked about in his state report, AB 1421, and he talked about $5 billion, and that was for 1 year in an LAO estimate. The CTC actually's full report on that is they indicate 31 billion less in fuel tax over the next decade. So it's 5 billion in the next year, but then it grows because of EV. So again, no state money, and that state money is going to further be focused on things like system preservation and SHOP. So I'm going to skip the next 2 bullets because you all are aware about the CalCog Forum and CARTA. But, it was interesting. I attended PBA's Education and Economics Workshop on the 12th, and they discussed a lot of development projects. And so we all know about Placer Campus. Corey's spoken about it. You're all aware of what's going on. What I want to point out here is that groundbreaking of the first building is 27, and the opening of the first building is in 28. So we talk about Placer 1, we talk about Village 5 in Lincoln and all of the residential that's coming, but let's not forget we have an entire university coming, and there's going to be students there in 3 years. We also know that they're going to have the safety training center, which I think is really cool. I hope I get an invitation to like go drive my truck around there really fast one day. That would be nice. A boy can dream. But the other presentation that I was fascinated by, and I admit, we forget about this, was one by Buzz Oates and the fact of their Placer Commerce Center. So not only do we have the campus coming, not only do we have all the homes coming, which we all want. We want all these things. This is our future. But we also have the Placer Commerce Center, which is 6.4 million square feet of commercial development, okay? And it's fully entitled. And that picture is recent. They're actively putting in sewer. My big point in all this is it's here, it's coming, and we've got to get going. We cannot wait on the state. And while we have just a great supporter in Congressman Kiley, he's doing that hard work inside of a big chamber and also with an executive administration. So there's absolutely just no more time to wait. And that's why we are going to move forward with a PID to look at express lanes in the middle of 65. That's the end of my report. Happy to field questions.
Would the bus rapid transit go down that toll road, that toll lane, or no?
I think that would absolutely be ideal. We have the Link project, the Rapid Link that's coming is going to be a 3-year pilot, which would expire. So as part of that, by the time we're getting into that phase of sort of policy, we'll have really good near-term data on what sort of express transit usage there was. We would, at this point in time, definitely envision, bus rapid transit down that lane.
Great.
Yeah.
Any other directors have questions of our
Yeah.
executive? Yes.
It's a little bit of an insane question, but on that lane that you're talking about, will you have a minimum speed limit so that somebody that doesn't pay to get on there and go 45 miles an hour in front of everybody?
Well, you can post minimum speed limits, and they're tough to enforce. But there is a way to deal with that. And so, typically with these express lanes, there would be no 5-axle trucks, there would be no 3-axle trucks, there would be no trucks with trailers, and quite frankly, there'd be no school buses. You'd have the business rules that it would be light-duty vehicles, motorcycles, right? And then, public buses that can meet a minimum standard. That is one of the reasons you don't do school buses, because they struggle to keep up at 55 miles an hour. So we will have business requirements around it that will guarantee a free-flowing sort of system, and it'll be a highly efficient, facility. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Sorry.
No, you drew out a broader answer that I think was helpful. Any other? No?
Just a quick question
Okay.
on the funding sources, Matt. So with that approach, what are the different funding sources that become available?
So that's the tough part, right? So YOLO 80 right now has got federal dollars. It's got a $70+ million infra grant on it. What we will have to do is go seek and find the funding. We do have opportunities with a partnership in Sparta, right? That Sparta agency, which also has bonding authority. We will seek, also investment partners. We might actually look to a California Capital Infrastructure Bank. So we have to put the financial package together. What's important, though, if we're going to is to make sure, and this is what we talked about with Caltrans about, is we have to be very conscious of revenue traffic. This has got to be a project that pencils out financially. We cannot sort of scope creep it and escalate it so much that it's not affordable. And so it has to have things like physical separation. It will have to be separated by delineators between the general purpose lanes, right? Things like that to make sure that that our violation rate is, sub 5%, that we can do that. The other good thing is that all of that revenue that it generates will stay inside of that corridor, and it will stay for a public purpose, and then we will reinvest it. So over time, we'll be able to extend those lanes. We'll also be able to invest it in auxiliary lanes that are currently environmentally cleared that have no tolling purpose. So over time, State Road 65 will be able to sort of self-generate its own income. And so, but part of that will be looking for investors. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Board direction to the executive director? Any? None? All right. Our next meeting? 23rd. April 23rd? I thought there was some, oh, informational items are in your packet? Yeah, informational items in your packet. Between now and our April 23rd meeting, Director Broadway and I will be at the CCJPA in beautiful Sassoon City, where we hope the It's factory is open, so we can get those sandwiches. Yes, it's a warehouse there, right there in Sassoon City.
Do you
want to come
do you
with
need
us?
staff support?
They'll take you as the third one so they can get.
All right, if
And
there's,
one more
yes.
thing. Board direction to everybody is have a happy Easter, everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Because we'll have Easter before our next meeting.
Yeah, thanks very much. If there's nothing else to come before us, we are adjourned.